Hi, everybody. Welcome to U.S. History class. This is our last section of notes for this unit, so that does mean your notes are due once we are done with these notes. So go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So today we're talking about the mass of people that emigrated to the United States during the turn of the century, roughly from 1870 to 1920. Millions flocked to the land of opportunity, primarily from places in Europe and Asia. Now, there were a lot of reasons why they were coming here, and that's for a series of push and pull factors. Push factors are things that are pushing one out of their country and encouraging them to leave, whereas pull factors are things that are encouraging them to come to a specific place. So some push factors that they were dealing with were things like famine, land shortages, overpopulation, very few jobs being available, religious and political persecution. And they wanted to come here to the United States where they could have better access to jobs, land. There was still a lot of opportunity to be had here. So it was a pretty difficult journey to be traveled by steamship. From Europe to the United States across the Atlantic took about a week. From China or Japan to California took about 3 weeks. Now, most of the time, these people were crowded into cargo areas. They were crowded, very dirty. There wasn't any fresh air. Disease was very common along these journeys, and more often than not, there was at least a few deaths before you actually got to the United States. So if you were traveling with your grandparents, there was a high likelihood that they wouldn't survive the trip. So points upon their entry, and I'm going to fix that slide real quick so you guys can see that information at the bottom. So getting to the point that, there we go, that's a lot better, that immigrants arriving from Europe would go to Ellis Island in New York, pictured here. And they received roughly 17 million immigrants from 1892 to 1924. You had to pass an inspection. This included a medical check and a legal check. Only criminals and the extremely ill were sent home. So there was a chance that you might have gotten separated from your family upon your arrival. And say you're the only one that didn't pass the medical check, you'd be sent back alone, without your family. On Angel Island, things were a little bit worse for Asian immigrants as they arrived there. It was a much harsher treatment for them. They were held like prisoners in quarantine areas for days, and they were much more likely to send people home. A lot of people, especially on the West Coast, did not want more Asian people coming into the United States. Now, there were some troubles here in the melting pot, one of the biggest ones being that of culture shock. Now, this is the confusion and anxiety of entering a society you don't understand. This led to a lot of ethnic communities being established, places like Chinatown, Little Italy, Little Havana, like those sorts of places that we think about that were built for many immigrants to live amongst each other in a sort of safety net in their own culture. And they tried to preserve their culture while also becoming American. They were still able to practice what they had always done, but they were also able to participate in American society. So there was a huge rise of discrimination as well, oppressing hyphenated Americans, especially like Irish Americans, especially, were viewed as a threat to the American way of life. This political cartoon here is one targeted specifically at those from Ireland because they are Catholic. Depicts these Catholic alligators marching up to munch on the poor, helpless Protestant children as the Vatican stands in the background. Now, this was a very common thing for political cartoons to make fun of these other groups of people just because they were slightly different. In the United States, something known as nativism also began to arise. This was a strong favoritism for native-born Americans, meaning they were born here. And the myth of the superior Anglo-Saxons began to grow. Mainly, this is for people of British, German, or Scandinavian descent. Discrimination massively increased towards immigrants, especially towards Asians on the West Coast. There was a recession in the California economy that was blamed on Asians taking jobs, and they were persecuted for that. To the point that the government began to pass anti-Asian legislation. We had the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, for 10 years, most Chinese people would not be allowed into the country. But then it was extended for another 10 years in 1892, and it denied entry, essentially established a quota as to how many Chinese people could be let in, which was a very small number. In San Francisco, Japanese students were segregated into special schools, so they were separate from the white children. And as a result, after this, the U.S. had basically closed the door on Asian immigration and didn't allow any more into the country. All right, so that is it for notes for today. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.